1982 would mark a bit of a lull in the early 80s of Shonen Jump, a period where gag manga were plentiful and the big hits of the previous year got to spread their wings. Stop Hibari Kun, Captain Tsubasa, Cat's Eye, and Black Angels would use this year to make a bigger impact, which may be at the cost of this year having less hits than usual. Regardless though, today we're going to look at what manga began in Shonen Jump in 1982. Starting off, we have Scrum by Koji Kiseki, which lasted 11 chapters and 1 volume. This seemed to be a fairly straightforward rugby manga where a ragtag bunch of students group up to form a rugby team. The single volume covers the formation of the team, them training in the mountains, and a practice game from the sound of things. Sadly, it wouldn't last long, but this won't be the last we'll hear from Koji Kiseki, as they'd end up going on to produce a few large sports series in Jump later on in the 80s. Following the massive success of Ring ni Kakuro, which ended in late 1981, Masumi Kurumada would begin a new series spanning a respectable 96 chapters and 10 volumes called Fuuma no Kojirou. Kurumada would veer away from over-the-top action sports to pure over-the-top battle manga, this time with a focus on ninjas and swords. While a lot of tropes had previously been established, especially within Ring ni Kakuro, Fuuma no Kojirou might be one of the first ever battle shonen manga in a traditional sense, at least when comparing it to what we widely consider battle shonen now. The beginning of the series sees Hakuo Academy, a prestigious school who used to be dominant in martial arts and sports tournaments in schools, on the decline, with their rivals Seishikan taking their place and poaching all the best candidates from them. To combat this, they seek help from the Fuuma clan, a group of ninja who live deep within the mountains, and what starts as a pretty goofy sports battle series quickly morphs into a battle between two ninja clans, the Fuuma and the Yasha. From here on, the protagonist Kojirou and his brothers fight the 8 generals of the Yasha clan, as well as Kojirou's new rival Musashi Asuka. Asuka and Kojirou each wielding one of the 10 sacred swords, artifacts that give the users the power to rule the world. New enemies appear in the form of the Warriors of Chaos, old enemies become allies, characters die and didn't actually die, and swords are collected. A lot of traditional shonen battle manga tropes are on display here. The large cast of characters and endless battles also lead it to feel like a rough version of modern battle manga we see today. It's fairly simple in terms of its plot and character writing, but it's cool to see the building blocks of shonen battle manga assembled throughout the years of Jump's history, and I think Masumi Kurumada helped greatly with that, not only with his career-defining works like Ring ni Kakuro and Saint Seiya, but also with Fuuma no Kojirou. The manga isn't entirely translated, but 24 chapters have been, which seems to cover around halfway. For some reason, chapters would be split up into larger chunks in their volume releases during this time period, so on sites like AniList or MyAnimeList, you might see it listed as having 42 chapters instead of the 96, which actually ran in Jump, so think of it having closer to around 50 chapters completed, I'd guess. The rest of the story finishes up this Holy Sword War arc and then begins its final arc, the Fuuma Rebellion, where the surviving members of the Fuuma clan face off against a fake reborn Fuuma clan, a group of warriors controlled by something called the Death Crest. Sadly, it seems that Kurumada was unable to continue the series because of his father passing away, leading to the final arc being called fatalistic by some. Despite the situation surrounding its ending, it's a fun manga that was likely quite fresh for its time, but now is pretty basic in comparison to what we have. I do think there's a lot of value in looking back on it though, if you want to see where shonen manga came from or to experience some fun old school battles. Masumi Kurumada's art is great as always too, although a lot of characters end up looking kind of samey. Fuuma no Kojirou also spawned a bunch of supplemental material as well, including multiple OVA adaptations, a prequel and spin-off manga, one being Fuuma no Kojirou Gaiden Asuka Mumyocho, which is still ongoing. It also got a TV drama in 2007, so it's managed to remain relevant ever since its initial debut, which is very cool. Kickoff by Takuchiba would last 96 chapters and 12 volumes. Based on its name and covers, you might assume it was a football series in the same vein as Captain Tsubasa, but it was actually more of a romantic comedy with a football club as its background. It followed Tayo and Yumi, who meet and fall in love at first sight at the school entrance ceremony, both of them joining the football club as a player and a manager, and wacky romantic antics ensue. It's apparently famous for a particular type of scene depicting the two characters looking at each other and repeating each other's names in their heads. Something which happened a lot in the manga, 186 times to be exact, from the sources I found, and it seems to be parodied and referenced now and then too. Issue 7 of 1982 saw the cover celebrate the Sapporo Snow Festival, an event that takes place in early February with a history dating back to 1950. Back then, 6 students built 6 sculptures out of snow, and it's been a tradition ever since, with these sculptures getting more and more intricate as the years went by. It's been used a lot by various companies, organizations, and media franchises to advertise too, Shonen Jump being no exception. I'm not sure whether or not they did collaborate and build a snow statue in 1982. There were sculptures of the Iowani Palace, King Kamehameha the Great, and some dinosaurs from this year. It would also be the first year with an English flyer, not something I could find, but this was an event that did have some international popularity surrounding it. In 1985, Kinnikuman would feature heavily getting a statue, and in present day, the 2024 festival had a Jujutsu Kaisen statue as well as merch tied to the event. Other popular anime and manga like Gundam Seed Freedom also saw them getting a small statue to tie in with the recent movie release, and Golden Kamuy, which makes sense as parts of the story take place around this region. Honestly, I'd encourage you to look into it yourself, as some of the sculptures made are very cool, and I'll definitely be keeping my eye on it next February to see what people make. I'll also take this intermission to quickly gush about Hibari once again, who is center stage on this cover. Hibari only had 13 chapters at this point, but was often front and center, a testament to its popularity. She was also featured alongside Arele for the 700th issue cover, and had a bunch of solo covers towards the end of the year with some great artwork, further cementing the manga's popularity. The Fighter by Toshio Tanegimi and Eidai Aoki lasted 14 chapters and 2 volumes, and was a manga about fighter jet planes. The current top plane is shot down by a new Soviet one called the MiG-31, so it's up to Japan with their brand new fighter plane equipped with an artificial brain to fight back. It's an interesting and foreign concept to me, not something you'd expect from Jump now, but vehicle-based combat series or racing series were very popular with boys in the late 70s and early 80s. The Fighter seems to be more technical and mature in some scenes, with a lot of dialogue and a focus on the self-defense forces developing new planes. The action seems cool though, but even back then, I'm not sure this is a manga that would have ever lasted very long. Starting the week after third year Kumengumi ended, High School Kumengumi by Motoe Shinizawa would begin, lasting 261 chapters and 20 volumes. Essentially, it's the same series and premise, but taken to a high school setting. A small portion has been translated, but it's pretty much the same as its prequel. Check a chapter or 2 out if you want a dose of older gag manga, but be aware some jokes are very dated or just hard to understand as they rely on references that are tied to 80s Japan. I explained the premise of Third Year Kumengumi in my 1980 history video, but it's basically a gag manga following a group of 5 boys with funny faces who get into all sorts of predicaments, usually involving another group with 5 members. The series would continue to be serialized for the majority of this decade, seeing the magazine gradually shift to become more action-focused, it outliving Dr.Slump and seeing Dragon Ball begin, but we're a few videos away from discussing that series. Yoroshiku Haru Ichiban was a 12-chapter 2-volume baseball manga by Norihiro Nakajima, and from initially reading about it, I thought it would be pretty basic, but it opens up with our protagonist straight up killing multiple sharks. It's quite the intro, which makes sense as it's coming from one of the creators of Astro Kyudan, the insane baseball series that was a crucial piece of influence to Battle Shonen. Other than that though, there's not too much to say about it. It was a bit of an over-the-top baseball series following a rookie team who want to get to the Koshin. It has some lovely artwork though, and I can't praise Nakajima's art style enough. Cosmos End by Toshio Kasahara was a sci-fi manga that only lasted 13 chapters and 2 volumes, although it seems to be an intentionally short work. The story focuses on a supermassive black hole that's formed in the galaxy called the Ginenunga Gap. A team of characters in the ship Yggdrasil venture to the center of the Milky Way to find a way to prevent the cosmos end from happening, dealing with ancient aliens, betrayal, and the dangers of space along the way. It's described as a very dense and elaborate work, filled with its own lore and story that many seem to think didn't really fit Jump's demographic, but praised its writing regardless. Following the end of Tennis Boy a few months earlier, the duo of Kenichi Kotani and Yu Terashima would return with Winning Shot, a golf manga following a similar formula. It would only last for 23 chapters and 3 volumes, however. The story would follow Ryo Takasugi following in his father's footsteps, joining a golf club, gradually getting better and better at the sport as he goes on to joining competitions. Overall, it seems to be a pretty standard affair with no special moves or anything like that, but it did keep the older looking female characters which frequented Tennis Boy. Sadly, they weren't enough to keep Winning Shot from being axed. Umisora Toraburiko was a 10-chapter, 1-volume series by Hiroshi Aro, focusing on slapstick gag elements in a similar vein to Stop Hibari Kun. The plot follows Naoto, a womanizing boy who ends up double booking on dates. In a panic, a magician comes by and offers Naoto 2 wishes, so he wishes for a body double of himself as well as a cute girl, only for the magician to roll those 2 into one and make a female version of himself. I actually really love the premise. I think it has a lot of potential for some strong gag and thematic elements, and I wish it went on longer or was translated. Its short run and premise might have some correlation with Stop Hibari Kun, both being slapstick gags that mess around with ideas of gender and romance. Hibari going on hiatus at various points throughout its run, mid-1982 being one of those times. Perhaps Jump wanted to try to chase the success Hibari had by trying something similar as Hibari was so popular. There's not much substance to this idea other than its similarities to Hibari and the fact it debuted during one of the hiatuses, with Umisora ending in the same issue as Hibari would make a grand return. Earlier in the year, Hiroshi Aro would also produce the 3-chapter-long ecchi gag series Gomen Kudasai Alligator, which would eventually be compiled with other one-shots in a collection. His contributions to the main Jump magazine were pretty short, and it's unfortunate nothing of his ever took off, as I really like the artwork he's produced. Yabure Kabure by Hiroshi Motomiya would be one of his shorter works in Jump, spanning 28 chapters and 3 volumes, but it also might be his weirdest. The story follows Hiroshi Motomiya himself in a documentary-style account as he tries to become a politician in Japan. After going on hiatus from making manga and playing golf all the time, he's spurred on by the young people of Japan who have been inspired by his work to try to run for a House of Councillors position. This doesn't go the best though, as he has some tough opposition, and him wanting to make a manga about this process would be in violation of the Public Offices Election Act, as it could qualify as a pre-campaign. As he grapples with the legal system, Motomiya takes the time to send letters to various politicians and interviews them within the manga. The art depicting him as a stylized version of himself and the other politicians are either photorealistic versions of themselves or actual scanned-in photos. It's a really weird and novel idea artistically, which I love. Honestly, that goes for the whole manga. Who else would make an autobiographical account of them trying to become a politician and publish it within Weekly Shonen Jump? It fits Motomiya's interests in politics, which crop up in his other works, and him being one of Jump's first veterans, as well as Jump's eagerness to experiment at this point in time, likely led to this manga getting serialized. It's a wild idea that they perhaps thought would bring attention to the magazine, and it likely did, with newspaper articles cropping up. It seems in large part making fun of Motomiya though, although he also did show up in Playboy with his own 2-page spread article. I think the volume release also has a big list of mangaka who gave their thoughts on Motomiya's plan, which feature a number of popular Jump artists at the time like Kurumada, Eguchi, and Tetsuo Hara, as well as Osamu Tezuka. This event isn't anything I've really heard about, nor do I know anything about 1980s Japanese politics, so I can't gauge how much of an impact this actually had, but regardless, I think it's really fascinating, and I love how bold of a plan this was, and it helps color Motomiya and Jump in a really weird and playful way for me. Nobu ga Iku by Motoki Monma would last 11 chapters and 1 volume. It was a kendo manga following Tokuro Nobu, a boy who wants to be the best at kendo. From what I've gathered, it was a pretty straightforward sports manga featuring a lot of popular tropes from the time, like the main character having a deceased father figure, a strong rival school, and some creative use of kendo as a sport based on some of the artwork I've seen. I don't think any characters were superpowered, but many seem to have their own gimmicks, like one being blindfolded and another having some super fast seeming technique. Despite some praise for its amount of characters, not many people were impressed by it, which is likely why it got axed so quickly. Jun would be another short manga at only 10 chapters and 1 volume by Hiromi Murashita, which I believe is their debut work. It followed Jun, a junior high school student, and his mother Nana, a 29-year-old widow. The premise of the manga seems to be about the two men who want to court Jun's mother. One's an erotic manga artist who lives next door, and the other is a university professor. Jun likely gets in the way of this, maybe trying to influence his mother's decision, or not wanting his mother to remarry at all due to his father, or some weird Oedipal reason. The art and premise strikes me as something that doesn't fit in Jump. It being so centered on an older divorced woman is also not something I'd expect from the magazine and its usual action-packed roster. But I think if Jump were to serialize a work like Jun, it would have been in 1982, where Jump was at its softest. I alluded this in the last history video, but the manga was filled with female main characters at this time, and a lot of gag and romance works. Jump might have also been experimenting with all these shorter series and concepts due to successful works like Dr.Slump and Hibari. This is the year where I think that's the most apparent, and it would bleed into 1983, although gradually more action-focused manga would take center stage. Sho and Daichi by Yoshihiro Togashi would last 31 chapters and 3 volumes. Objection! I knew this would happen at some point because their names are so similar, but I mean Yoshihiro Takahashi, not Yoshihiro Togashi of Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho fame. Being half boxing manga and half dogfighting manga. This is a pretty novel concept, having two stories told in parallel of the human Sho doing boxing and the dog Daichi doing dogfighting. They're initially friends and live with their sailor father until one day he dies at sea in a storm and they part ways, potentially meeting up again throughout the story. A sport you don't really get to see depicted in manga today is surfing, and that's what Umi no Senshi is, which lasted 10 chapters and 2 volumes by Tetsuya Saruwatari, best known for their seinen manga series, Tough. Umi no Senshi followed Ryo Katagiri, the best surfer in Japan, who has osteosarcoma and not long left to live, so he wants to challenge the other best surfers around the world, including the Australian monster Mike Rogers. They decide to surf around the dangerous Red Reef Point, which is known for its sharp corals and impossibly large sharks. Here is where you realize that this isn't really a very serious surfing manga. It's super over the top and very violent, with one of the character entrances being them driving a Rolls Royce through a wall. It would end with the main character surfing into the sunset of Japan, presumably dying doing what he loves. Based on the descriptions I could find, this doesn't feel very suited to Jump, but would make for a great so bad it's good action movie. Yoroshigu Mechadoc would be one of the better fairy manga of 1982, getting 88 chapters and 12 volumes that ran for a further 25 chapters after a short break, being Ryuji Sugihara's biggest work in Jump. Instead of it being a pure racing-focused manga like Circuit Wolf, which was popular in the 70s, Mechadoc would put more of an emphasis on the tuning and tinkering of the cars for racing, incorporating the latest technology of the time in the manga and likely being quite informative. Jun Kazami would work at an auto repair shop called Mechadoc. There he would fix cars up and make them suitable for racing, which he would also test and race in himself. The manga spans several arcs which seem to ramp up in stakes, from drag racing to Grand Prix, with more race car quality cars popping up as the manga went on. It previously starting out with normal cars which would have been modified. Mechadoc would get a 30-episode anime in 1984, which kept the series relevant enough for it to get that 25-chapter extension, as well as helping produce car model kits based on the series, some of which have come out as recent as 2013. Following the trend in racing manga, next we have Iron Don Quixote, which lasted 10 chapters and 2 volumes by none other than Tetsuo Hara, the artist behind Fist of the North Star, which we'll be covering in our next episode. So perhaps it's a good thing Iron Don Quixote didn't last too long. This is a motocross manga that's partially translated. Maybe at some point someone will finish it, as it's only 10 chapters, but right now you can read the first 4. The story follows Gen Kurosu, a lone biker aiming to take down Japan's biggest motocross team, the Red Army. It's less traditional in its portrayal of the sport, with a lot of violent acts being performed, which some have described as being similar to Fist of the North Star. It also features a rival character that reminds me of Shin, as well as a heroine who slaps the shit out of Gen called Shirona Reika. She's very cool, and I found her surprisingly likable with the short amount of page time she has. Definitely a standout for me and a neat little manga from this year. Mekin Butai by Hikaru Miyazaki was a short 5-chapter miniseries, which in English translates to Sterilization Unit, and is pretty dark for a manga that ran in Jump. It starts with a US military helicopter crashing into the Alps, which house a dangerous virus. This ends up spreading to a small school, and it's up to the US military to deal with the problem to keep their secrets safe. What follows is them trying to sterilize the staff and children of the school, i.e. killing them, with the teachers and janitors fighting back, trying to save the kids, them dying fairly gruesomely in the process. Other events that happen include a student being burnt alive by a flamethrower, and the female teacher lying naked in the road in order to steal a car to escape. It sounds especially wild and shocking, and I'm surprised this was allowed in Jump with how visceral it is. And to finish off 1982 is the similarly short 6-chapter 1-volume Kurobe Hikyo Monogatari Hasaitai wo Nuke by Yumi Kazuto, or in English, the secluded Kurobe story Into the Shatter Zone. This is a documentary biographical manga focusing on the construction of the Kurobe Dam, which has been heavily featured in kaiju movies like 1961's Mothra, 1964's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and 1966's Gamera vs. Baragon. The construction of the dam also took the lives of 171 people to complete it, which is reflected in the manga as it focuses on the dangerous working conditions that the construction workers faced while building the dam. This includes fracture zones of weak earth that give way into underwater tunnels that likely crushed or drowned those who fell in. This is another odd manga that doesn't really fit what Jump is, a documentary style work drama about dam construction, which I imagine would mostly appeal to older people but could have served some educational purposes. 1982 overall was very weird, with me initially thinking it would be disappointing with its lack of heavy hitters, and while I don't think any manga from it are amazing in this year, the majority were very interesting. From those I mentioned today, you can read some of Fuuma no Kojirou, High School Kumengumi, and Iron Don Quixote, if you want a small peek into this period of Jump. From next year onwards, we'll start to talk about some really big heavy hitters in Jump's history, namely Fist of the North Star. For now though, if this is your first video in this series, you can check out the other ones I've made covering Jump's history from the very beginning in 1968. And if you'd like to hear me talk about more modern Jump manga as well as other topics, I have a bunch of videos on my channel and would appreciate it a ton if you checked them out and subscribed. As always, thank you for watching, remember to be kind, and take care.